All right, we're going to get started. So good afternoon. I'm Andrea Sampson, the CEO of Talk Boutique and your host and moderator for today's sense-making conversation. Thank you so much for joining us. Well, the summer is now officially underway and we're seeing a lot of changes beginning to happen. More and more businesses are opening and welcoming customers, and some employees are returning to their places of work for the first time in months. Every person who's been involved in the pandemic lockdown is now faced with a lot of decisions. Some of those decisions are easy to make, like the implications are on you and your immediate surroundings, and that's not that difficult to make. For example, you might be deciding whether or not you're going to continue to wipe down your groceries before you put them away. It's a decision that's going to impact you and your household, and one that you can anticipate the implications of the choice that you make. But others are a lot more difficult, and many people are faced with these. If you're a manager or a business owner, you might be tasked with deciding if your team should return to the office. Now, there are many variables to consider, and well, there isn't a wrong choice, but the choices that you do make are going to carry second and third order implications, like the impact on family, or the impact on family of those who have small children and they don't have access to care at the moment, or the need to reorient your work environment to ensure workers can safely inhabit the space that you're asking them to come back to, or the impact on those with compromised immune systems who are going to need some special accommodations, or even the need to create transportation options for those who rely on public transport and are worried. Decisions become more and more difficult as we begin to weigh the implications. And for many, the ability to choose can be crippling. So we asked our guest today, Dr. Mirella De Civita, an expert in risk, resilience, and behavioral medicine, to help us with this dilemma. Mirella is a clinical psychologist with a PhD in psychology and a postdoctoral fellowship in behavioral medicine. She's the president of Papillon MDC, a management consulting firm that serves an array of private, public, and social sector institutions. She's also the founder of Heron International, an online worldwide coaching firm. Mirella holds several executive, corporate, and mentor coaching designations and is a member of the Association of Corporate Executive Coaches and an official member of the Forbes Coaches Council. Mirella shares her wealth of knowledge in personal psychology and transformation in her book, The Courage to Fall into Life, The Tao of Purposeful Existence, published in 2011. Mirella, help us to understand this growing importance on decision-making, especially given our recent experience with the pandemic. Welcome, Mirella.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here and to be talking about a very important topic. So let me go ahead and share my screen. I want to begin by reading, if I may, a very short paragraph written by Marcus Aurelius, and it's a book called Meditations. These are self-reflections that he wrote to himself, and it's been collected in this wonderful small book called Meditations. And I believe it actually sets the stage for what we are going to be talking about. Nothing is so conducive to greatness of mind as the ability to subject each element of our experience in life to methodical and truthful examination, always at the same time using this scrutiny as a means to reflect on the nature of the universe, the contribution any given action or event makes to that nature, the value it has to the whole. And he actually writes the word whole with a capital W. And he goes on to say the value it has to mankind. So we are not talking about the usual right and wrong situations that we often find ourselves, and we have to make a decision. And so there is a wrong way to go about it, and we're not going to take that decision. We're also not talking about the many decisions we make automatically day in, day out. What we are talking about are those conflictual situations where instantly we get this gut-wrenching feeling that we are in front of a real important dilemma. And these dilemmas usually do not fall into a right versus a wrong category. They actually present two right options, but we can't do both. We have to choose one. And the choice that we make actually has at stake many important variables, be it our personal values, what we said to ourselves we would be and we find ourselves becoming, commitments we may have made to ourselves in relation to our goals, as well as commitments to the goals of others. And the last and most important one that we are probably going to end this call, this conversation on, is that decision can forever change the future trajectory of not only your life, but the lives of others. These are the kinds of conflictual situations that we will find ourselves often facing as we progress as leaders. Now, for the sake of our conversation, I'm going to make a choice to present three characters in relation to where they find themselves in their professional life, knowing fully well that the first character I'm going to present to illustrate a right and a right dilemma could very easily one day become the second, who can very easily become the third character. But for the sake of simplicity, we're going to look at them as individuals and where they are in their professional life. The first one is Lucy. She's your subject matter expert. We may, in fact, that's how I started, as a subject matter expert, professional contributor. And she's been promoted in her role 3 weeks ago due to her amazing performance on very important projects that her company had assigned to her. And her aspirations is to become a team lead and eventually become a manager. And recently she's been asked to take over a task that would require working with a number of senior partners in the company. This will require her to be responsible in determining priorities, making sure that everyone is meeting deadlines, while at the same time doing what she's really good at, which is crunching numbers, running the statistics, and writing the reports. She makes a decision, which is an automatic one, to go and talk to her manager about her discomfort around taking on this role because she doesn't feel she has the skills to influence without authority. Her manager dismisses her concern and quickly reminds her that this is a defining moment in her career if she wants to become a team lead. Lucy isn't settled and she must decide. Option one is to decline because she doesn't feel that option one is to take on the role along with everything that's going to come with it. That's a right decision. And she's got option two, which is another right decision, which is to decline taking on this influencing without authority role and sticking to her statistics. Whichever decision she makes at this point in her leadership development will obviously impact her. And she probably has the luxury, and I'm going to use this word, of really staying true to her personal values, as well as compromising her commitments to herself. Possibly her manager is going to experience maybe discomfort because now she has to assign someone else, but the impact of that decision will not go farther than that. However, as you move up in your leadership positions, you will definitely find yourself facing other right dilemmas. And so here I present you Eeka, who happens to be a VP of operations. She's holding a meeting with a few of her colleagues and suppliers, all VPs, and she's presenting information that has been gathered by her 6 directors. And while she's going through her slides, very much like I'm doing right here, one of her colleagues, much senior to her in years of experience and also clout of influence, begins to question her numbers, even after he's reviewed her deck and has already asked his questions. And as this conversation is going, she makes a split moment decision to assume accountability and fix the inconsistencies and get back to them. As she's walking to her office, she finds herself unsettled and wonders whether she should, option one, talk to her colleague about his intervention, voice her disapproval, and choose how they're going to work together. Or the other option is consider bringing it up, because at their executive team meeting with the president in the they all decided to adhere to a team charter, which means calling one another out when there is lack of collaboration. We can all feel sorry for the Maekas of this world. We may all have felt this moment, and whatever decision she makes, there's really not a wrong decision here, but either one carries consequences, except at this time the consequences are also going to be felt by the colleagues who were in that meeting that will know that Maeka had an opportunity to choose the second option. And some may also feel that that might have not have been the right option to take, and some may argue that she should take the first option. In the end, it'll be her decision. And now she realizes, potentially for the first time, that her leadership decision has in fact greater consequences for the whole. But it is only as you move further up, and I refer to this as being woke, where there is the fullness recognition that your choice goes way beyond your team, way beyond your organization, and can in fact begin to impact organizations, communities, and people that you may never meet outside of your institution. And so I want to introduce you to Alex. We may all have met Alex. We may have found ourselves to be in a similar situation as Alex. He's a managing partner of a financial investment firm. In his previous position, he actually built a green portfolio that includes companies that prioritize saving the planet. Recently, one of these companies within this portfolio was facing fraud charges involving collusion between existing companies in recycled waste to the exclusion of new companies that wanted to enter this space. 2 employees from Alex's firm were actually also involved in this collusion. And although the immediate firing of these employees kind of calmed the internal discussions, he had other important obligations. Some of his clients saw this entire portfolio as being tainted and wanted out. And then he also had several potential investor groups claiming that the entire financial investment firm was covering up other collusions to drive up their overall value. And here he is now faced with a dilemma involving 2 possibilities, and he could only choose one. The first one is to dismantle the entire green portfolio, conduct an internal audit, and that would satisfy one group of stakeholders. The second option, equally right, is to focus on responsibility to these environmental groups who are telling him that had it not been for this portfolio, had it not been for the investments going towards these companies, these environmental groups would not have been able to do the things that they have done and that they would like to continue to do. There isn't any right or wrong here. Either one will carry consequences. And I would have to say that up until a year and a half ago, I really felt that I had figured out how to go about this. Keep in mind personal values, keep in mind commitments to goals of self and others, and remember the larger context. And then I realized that in fact, as you go up in a leadership position and start to assume greater scope of influence, these same factors, greater scope of influence, recognition of your power, are actually the same factors that may impede you from making a decision that is in fact going to be quite impactful, far beyond your own self-interest. And so this had me thinking, right? If it's the same mind that first notices this gut-wrenching, intellectually challenging dilemma, cannot be the same mind that makes the choice. And in fact, I found myself going back to some research that I had come across as a postdoc. This is research by Benjamin Labette in the 80s, where he actually wired up participants, you see that in the first image, to an EEG monitor, which is measuring brain activity, electrodes on their scalp, and then he asked them to complete a task. He asked them to press the lever that you see right there when they felt like it. And he also asked them to jot down, and he was obviously looking at where the eye was heading along this rotating clockwise red button. So he asked them to jot down when they first initially felt the conscious decision to move their finger. And what he found was that the brain activity that led to the pressing of the finger actually occurred half a second before there was this conscious decision to make that decision. In his later research, he also found that the brain predicted which hand a participant would decide to lift or push the lever somewhere around 8 to 9 seconds in advance before the participant even became aware of having made that decision. So with that in mind, I then started to wonder, even if I were to engage, even if we were all to engage, even if I were to teach everyone the 4 main questions to ask, to engage in deep reflections on our personal values and our commitments and our reflection to future trajectories, there is no guarantee that the option that I will arrive at will be one that is beyond my personal values, my personal commitments, and goals for everyone. There is no guarantee that this will happen. So what is one to do? I fundamentally, humbly have come to the conclusion that we actually need to bring in other minds. We need to bring in other minds, form a structure, a discipline around the process of collecting from many minds information, knowledge that we can then use to arrive at a choice that is inherently part of our responsibility toward others. And I cannot emphasize how important this is as we rise in our influence and in our use of power as leaders.
Thank you, Mirella. That was really interesting. I have so many questions, but before I go to my questions, I just want to remind our guests that you can ask Mirella questions as well. I want to actually go to where you were just at, which is the idea of values and goals and knowing the self. So let me get this right. So if I'm going to make a decision, and I'm going to come back to this, which is the predictive nature of the brain, but I'm going to put that one aside for a moment. Tell me, why is it important that my values come into it? How do my values play into my decision making? I mean, I think I know, but I want to make sure I'm clear on it.
Right. And this is really important because we are all guided by our values. And I believe at some point in everyone's life, we've had conversations with ourselves where we've actually had to make decisions around who we are going to be and how we're going to hold ourselves accountable to who we are going to be. And a lot of this comes down to what's important to us. And so earlier on in our careers, for instance, if we were to use Lucy as an example, she has, I guess, the almost the freedom to choose either or, and not necessarily have to really feel the weight of what that decision could mean to everyone else. She has a luxury of not, and here I am using the word luxury, right? Because there's no such thing as luxury in a dilemma. Yet at the same time, there is a recognition that at her level of influence, she can actually align her option to be very much a fit with her personal values. And in the case of Lucy, her value was, and that is something that I remember her voicing to me, never ever to do anything where I feel that there's a greater risk of failure for myself. And so that was a very deep and important value to her. Some would say that the value of bravery was not part of it. But then again, this is what makes personal values personal. No one else can judge them.
Right.
And yet, earlier on in your career, you could have that luxury. But as you move up, and as we saw with Eeka, and again, for those who heard me, I may have missed out a lot of details from Eeka. You might have said, oh, gee, I could actually see the complexity there's even more. And indeed, there are more complexities. As you move up, personal values begin to be the things, right? The factors that can actually hold us back from making that decision. Because now we're asking different questions. We're actually asking, how do our values impact others? And what will they mean for others?
And is it just values, or like, as I think about that, because I wonder, in the case of Lucy, as an example, I mean, she had a value of not being, her value was really about a little bit of risk aversion, but she also had some career goals. And so do the goals play into it as well?
Once again, right, this is what makes these right and right dilemmas so interesting, because anyone looking out would say to Lucy, no, you can't refuse. Did you not say that one of your goals is to become a team lead? Like, this is the opportunity. And yet at the same time, from Lucy's perspective, again, I go back to that word, right? She does have the luxury of saying, maybe not now, maybe later on. And who's
Right.
to say another opportunity won't come along? And again, watch where the focus is, watch where the attention is, watch where her brain is choosing to direct attention. Again, on her and what that could mean to her and how unprepared she is for that. So at that point in time, one can still have that compromise with self and say, you know, let's just wait this one out and believe. And that's the way the mind is built, is also to believe, to envision that there might be another opportunity. And for all we know, there may never be another opportunity for Lucy in this particular company.
You know, and I think in Eeka's case, there was actually an interesting situation there as well, which was, you know, and I think back to my, you know, my own time in the corporate world, and, you know, how those situations, you know, that's not a unique situation, right? That happens all the time. And, you know, you're at that critical juncture of, what do I do? You know, do I, you know, sort of put my hand up and go, hey, wait a minute, you had some culpability here. You're my boss and you should have caught this. Or do you take it on yourself and say, you know what, I'm going to take it on the chin and I'm going to move forward with it. And you know, to your point, there's no wrong answer here, because both of those things have different implications. But here's the thing: is it's how you're seen within the organization, right? That's a big part of the implication of this, because both of those create a different view. And, you know, as you get more senior, I guess the question becomes, which one of those responses is the one that will help you if your goal is to move up into more of a senior management role? What would, like, how do you manage that? How do you get outside of yourself and see that?
Right. And, you know, I used Eeka as an example because, you see, right there in the moment, she had like a nanosecond moment where she had to choose to fight or to just let go. And so that happened. And in, you know, talking to Eeka as she was exploring this one with me, she actually said, I knew it was the wrong thing to do to question him in that meeting. So in her mind, very quickly, this is how her mind is built, very quickly she was able to bring that moment into a right versus a wrong. And when I probed her on it, she says, because it would have been morally wrong for me to question him in front of suppliers. And so again, you know, her mind did that, her brain did that, it went into wrong and right, and then she chose in her mind the right. However, it wasn't settled. And so this is how we know we are facing that kind of right and right dilemma, when it isn't settled. And it wasn't settled for her. In that nanosecond, she made it, but it wasn't settled. And what wasn't settled was the bigger opportunity that lied before her. And whichever one she would take, obviously, is going to create consequences for her and may, in fact, limit or potentially broaden her prospects later on. However, at Eeka's level, probably the luxury is not the right word. There may not necessarily be this notion of woke, and that is recognizing that options can actually say a lot more about your culture to everyone else watching you. And it still is very confined within the organization, but it will say something about your culture, either or. And now some leaders, we all know these leaders don't even get there, and they
Right.
still stick to what didn't feel right. Whereas in Eeka's, she's just there. She's at that moment, that juncture where she now needs to bring herself to that level of awareness. And so this is very critical, because how do you get someone to that level of awareness, recognizing that that is still a decision she herself can only make, because the consequences are for her to live through those.
And I think what's interesting, you were just saying there, like she went immediately into a right wrong, right? So she said, it would be wrong for me to question my boss. But it's the piece afterwards. And what I find really interesting about this is that we often do this, right? We are in a situation where in that moment, we make the decision because it's based, to your point, on our values and our goals. And we know that, okay, right, our brain says right, wrong. And this comes back to the predictive nature of the brain. But here's the thing: if we live in that predictive nature, because that brain is saying, here's, based on who you are, here's the right decision for you. Mm-hmm. But it's only your brain talking. So is this like, so what is the right solution, or what is another solution for Eeka? Should she go and talk to people? Because I don't know that not calling her boss out, now maybe not in the meeting,
Right.
but perhaps there is because it was not sitting well with her. So
Correct.
should she bring others into that conversation? I mean, I don't know. What's where do we go from there?
Right. And one thing that I must say is that I actually acknowledged and applauded Eeka, recognizing, because it could have ended there. It could have ended her, taking on responsibilities that really didn't belong to her. This senior colleague had an opportunity to question before the meeting. It could have ended there. She could have gone on with her life and potentially have felt this conflict and done nothing with it. And so I applauded her in recognizing that actually that dilemma, the dilemma of doing what she did in that moment, happened, and yet she was still here. It wasn't resolved, and she wanted it. And obviously, when we go to the notion of woke, it's exactly that. And we see that, right? Because she could, in that moment, she doesn't have to be in Alex's position. She could, in that moment, gather, and that's the end of gather minds, go and talk, and talk about these two options. Because again, if it's the same mind that recognizes that dilemma, how can it be the same mind that's going to choose the one that has the consequences that are far more reaching than just yourself?
And so I guess that statement, the same mind, to me, that starts to take on a couple of different meanings, because, first of all, it's in the observation of the thing, I'm changed by the thing. So the mind that observed is not the same mind that actually has the thought after it. So there's that. But it's also the concept that the mind that can come to a conclusion, and especially based upon that biased place of my values, my goals, my vision, is not the same mind that can make the decision. So therefore, bringing others into it helps me to get that unbiased view, helps me to see what could be that I'm too blind to because of what I'm in this moment experiencing or seeing. Is that do I have that correct?
Yes, and indeed, it. When the option that you may have favored is the one that most of your trusted advisors or counselors or friends are questioning you on. You kind of know it, because we all know it. We all know how we get. Some of us get flustered as we are starting to feel that the option that we would want to go with. Remember, we're talking about right and right. There's really no wrong. Eeka could choose to speak to her colleague and it ends there, and that's right, or take the road of the team charter, and that's right too. So absolutely, the minute you start to recognize within you a sense of being challenged, whether it is you start to feel flustered, or you start to feel butterfly, or you start to feel anger rising, that's how you know that you absolutely need to be challenged. Because there's something here, there's something that you are not ready to give up. And the concept of woke is, we need to recognize that we are going to be giving up something about us for the greater good. And if we talk about Alex for a moment, right? Alex is the one who came up with the green portfolio. And
right.
He's the one that turned it into a success 3 years in a row. And that's one reason why he was promoted to managing partner. So anyone reading it, first brush of it would say, of course he can't, quote unquote, kill the portfolio. Of course not. And anyone would probably say that's probably where his heart is not. However, he's stepping back because this is no longer just his choice. He has now other groups that are saying, we're going to pull out of every other portfolio in your investment firm if you don't kill this portfolio. And so when we go back to the values, we know where Alex's values lie. At least we could say we knew where they lied when he did the green portfolio. Between you and I don't know where they lie today, being the managing partner and potentially having a lot more influence and power. I don't know if they still lie here. Only he knows this, right? And as much as I'm saying this, an open book here, we all recognize leaders that are in this type of position where with one decision could actually end the careers of many, as well as transform communities forever, some of these managers are not able to broaden their awareness and allow others into this decision-making process, such that the final decision, as Marcus Aurelius so eloquently said, is for the whole of mankind.
You know, we are living this real time right now. You know, I was reading this morning, I follow the World Economic Forum quite closely, and they have some great newsletters. And so this morning they were talking about sort of, what they're calling this time right now, the Great Reset. And as we move into the post reset world, what does it look like? And certainly, many organizations right now are grappling with some of their business practices around, do we go back to doing the things the way we did before, which may not have been environmentally friendly, or do we heed this reset where we've just seen lots of impacts on the world and now start to impact our own business by shifting and changing those. So, I think there's a lot of people grappling with this, and we're seeing our own governmental leaders. I mean, about a week ago, we all saw our own prime minister grapple with a question. He had the 21-second pause. And, what do you think was going on there?
Yeah. I mean, these are just, this is, again, we're talking about the mind. Well, this is just my mind right now coming automatically saying, based on just the knowledge that is also floating in here, he definitely recognized he was in front of a right conflictual situation. And there would not have been a wrong way. And most people, the way he answered, thought that was the wrong way. And had he answered another way, there would have been other groups saying that's the wrong way. And it. I mean, now that we've been sharing here for the past 30 minutes, you will likely see this when people have these long pauses and are not able to do this right and wrong, where the decision is automatic. That they recognized that their answer has far more reaching consequences than just what they want to say, what their values are. And so that was the pause. The pause was him recognizing, at least that's how I read it, that he was in fact facing a right dilemma.
We have a question from one of our listeners. So Allison is asking, can you talk about our experience of self-esteem, confidence, and how it impacts on our values? So how do fear and perhaps need for connection or approval play into all of this?
There's probably, there's so many ways for me to answer this, and I may not satisfy your deep desire for a clear-cut answer, because there isn't any. Confidence comes with doing. And I know most people would say confidence is something you could think about or think your way into confidence. I tend to be in the camp that says you need to do in order to grow in your confidence. Decision making is one way in which people become more confident about their skills and start to feel a greater sense of self-esteem. It's an action. So decision making is actually an action. And it's extremely more harder when you refrain from making decisions to grow in your confidence. So it goes the other way too. And so faced with indecision doesn't mean you lack confidence. It could easily mean that you recognize that this is not a right versus a wrong situation. And in order to continue to grow in your confidence is in fact to invite people to sort of spar with you, intellectually spar with you, think it through. Because as we think, we grow. And as we grow, we also choose where we direct our attention. And then next thing you know, over the course of doing, you may actually start to see a greater shift in your level of confidence. And then your values might actually start to change as well.
So I'm going to come back to the pausing for a moment, because I think there's something because pausing and then inviting others. And a couple of weeks ago, we had a guest on, Karen Ward, and her area she was talking a lot about curiosity and creativity. And one of the things that she talked about, and I love the way that she framed it, was staying in the question. And I think there's something about, I think you're sort of getting at the same thing, which is staying in the decision. Like, don't rush that decision. Like, if we look at Justin Trudeau as an example, I mean, he didn't have the luxury of being able to stay in, but he stayed in the question as long as he could. But for the rest of us, like, tell me about this, like staying in the decision. Is that a good idea?
And, so I happen to have tremendous respect for standing still. And, for me, standing still could take on different practices. It could be meditation, it could be prayer, it could be dance, it could be reading, right? But this moment of standing still means we are allowing ourselves the recognition that thoughts are going to arise in our minds, belief systems are going to show up. We may not recognize them as belief systems, but they are telling us something that we should or should not do, or it's them, not me. And in that moment, it's almost a practice of catching those thoughts, recognizing them, and then going back to that moment of stillness. So staying in a decision is, in fact, the recognition that as you stay in that place of discomfort, your mind will do what your mind does. It'll start to pop ideas. You can't stop that. This is what makes the mind the mind. Yet the moment of staying in that decision is also the recognition of catch and release. I catch the thought, I release the thought, I go back to that decision. I catch another thought, I release the thought, I go back into that decision. And that becomes a practice of attention. In the end, what you're doing is you're strengthening your attention. You're not strengthening attachment to ideas, you're strengthening your attention to focus. And then eventually, as this practice unfolds, I'm a big believer of still inviting people in, but you're going to be at a different place. You're not going to be at the same place that you were in prior to this practice. You're going to be at a totally different place, and potentially a lot more flexible in your mind. The psychological flexibility too is a practice. And so that's how I would probably entertain the staying in the decision, is not to take it for granted that I'm staying in my decision, so whatever thoughts come to mind is the thoughts I should do. It's the recognition that staying in the decision means standing still. And as the thoughts come, I catch and I release, I catch and I release. And in so doing, I strengthen my attention.
You gave us 3 examples, and each example sort of had an increasingly difficult decision, in that there was always a right and right, but the implications became greater. And when we think about that, especially as people are working through their careers, it's a really important thing. I think one of the things that I've learned of working with a lot of thought leaders is that people who have a lot of experience in thought leadership usually tend to be 2 things. 1, the most curious, and 2, those that question everything. And so they're usually not the ones that are jumping up and saying, let me tell you how it is. They're the ones saying, why do you think that? Mm-hmm. And so I wonder, is that, as I look at those 3 scenarios, and the final scenario, I can't remember, what was his name?
Alex.
And so in Alex's situation, like he had that, there's the gut reaction of course you can't close down the green portfolio. Right. But for him, he had to stay in that curiosity state of saying, what could I do? Because I think what's important here is that there aren't just 2 answers. There's probably hundreds. And in his brain, he had the polarity. Because either I close the fund and retain my clients, or I retain my clients, or I keep the funds open and I lose my clients. And yes, that both of those are equally true, but there are other options that are true. And is that part of it too, as a person who is progressing in your career, is understanding that staying in that decision allows for not just the catch and release, but for the opportunity for more opportunities or more ideas to present themselves and to get those opinions on those ideas? Is that sort of where, as we get more senior, where we should start to think?
Yeah. So what I have come to recognize is that it's a dual, it's like a dance. If I come to you with questions and you are receiving my questions, then the dance goes something like this. I'm questioning you because in my mind, I've already formed some answers and I'm letting go of those answers because I want to learn. You know, one mind alone cannot have all the answers. And by the way, if you think you're the smartest person in the room, I think there's a statement that goes, if you think you're the smartest person in the room, then you're not in the right room. So the idea that if this dance were to work between you and I, then we're both coming to it with a different set of lenses. I'm coming because I'm questioning, because in my mind, I already formed an answer that I'm saying, nah, I'm gonna release that one and let me learn. And you are also receiving me from the same kind of sort of philosophy. You're saying, oh, she's just questioning me because she's curious about my answer. So now that works. And in leadership, you want to have this all the time. However, sometimes there's a misstep. So I'm not a dancer. I don't do social dancing, but I've been, it's been explained to me in this way. There's a misstep, right? Where I'm coming with that, but you're receiving my questions as an attack. So if you're receiving my questions as an attack, more often than not, this leader will stop asking questions. Or if they're not quick enough, they'll start forming opinions about you as being someone that doesn't, is defensive, right? And then all of a sudden there's no dance.
So let's actually go back to Lucy for a moment, because I think this is really interesting. So in Lucy's situation, Maika's. So in Maika's situation, where she had this, challenge with her own boss, one of the options could be to go to her boss privately and ask questions.
Yeah.
Not call him out, but to understand. And so in the asking of questions, there becomes a deeper understanding. But and of course, which is important, but what's actually even more important is Maika's boss is now seeing her as someone who is open and ready for feedback. And which of course we know to be one of the traits of a good leader.
Right.
So
and we also know that as assuming she were to choose the option one and go at it this way, because we didn't even talk about the how of options and how we go about executing these, but that would be one way. And it could easily happen that in that moment of discussion, there's another conflictual situation that presents itself. That next thing you know, we've got like a sub theme to manage, and then that in itself leads us somewhere else. And so when we talk about leaders rising in their level of influence, we often miss, what are they rising to? Let go of everything that is visible and observable, but what are they rising to? Are they rising in their minds, in how they hold conversation? Are we actually looking at that? Because eventually we would all agree it would be wonderful to be reporting to someone like that. Because, if you happen to be an open person and you're able to engage in those conversations, it would be great. So this whole notion of, ascending to a position of power and influence where Alex found himself, the next position for him would be to have his own firm, also begs the question, how open is he in his reflection on this one being right and this one being right? And if he's not careful and he is stuck or he gets caught, just like a fish, he gets caught in his head around dismantling the green portfolio, then there's going to be no movement in that conversation because people will shut down. The people that want to close the green portfolio will shut down that conversation. And once again, because he's got the clout of influence, well, obviously they're going to stop fighting him. And then there's no learning for anyone.
Mirella, we are out of time. This has gone by in
so
a
fast.
flash. I know. I could talk to you all day. And the good news is that you're coming back to do some more Q&A next week. So for our listeners, please join us next week. Mirella will be back. Check out the virtual speaker series, and you will be. You can sign up for that for our Changemaker 20. So she will be back. We will not be having a Courageous Conversation next week because it happens to be that Wednesday is Canada Day. So we will postpone it till the next week. You will see John back on Wednesday of the following week. But next Friday, I will be back with Sense Making Conversations with Karen Ward, where we're going to be talking again about curiosity and creativity, and actually the Curiosity Summer Camp for adults that she's putting on. So be sure to join us next Friday at 12:30 for that. And Mirella will be back. And I think it's on Tuesday that you're back. Is that correct?
Yes, I do. Yes, I do. Yeah, I think it's Tuesday. Thank you so much. And Joanna, thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure, everyone. And I certainly hope that you will no longer look at situations that are conflictual as right and wrong, and go ahead and just test yourself as well. Thank you.
Absolutely. So our key take.
Bye, everyone.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good rest of your day.
Bye-bye.